Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this day, for the time that we have together in studying your word, and we invite your Holy Spirit's presence. We ask, Lord, that you can guide and direct us as we dig into the personal line of Moses, as it relates to the personal line of Miller, and that we can understand the structures of these stories. We pray for each person. We know, Lord, that you are working in our lives in various ways, and we just ask that the things that we study here will enlighten each person's mind and help them in their personal struggles. Be with those watching these videos and guide and direct us now, we pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So good morning, everyone. So we're going to continue our study with Moses line. And I'm just going to bring up here these diagrams. So remember, we had looked at Miller's line before. Miller's line had to do with the time of the end. That is, the person who God had chosen at the time of the end to be the first messenger. And we can see this here with Moses, that he's going to line up with Miller. With Miller, he had some experiences. He had some experiences that lined up with 9/11. So that was a really interesting understanding of Miller's personal line, because we know in the line that we have, August 11th, 1840 lines up with the empowerment of the first angel's message at 9/11, as well as April 19th. And in Miller's line, the September 11th, 9/11, at the Battle of Plattsburgh or Lake Champlain, where he experienced God's intervention, marks the empowerment of the first message for him personally. And then the arrival of the second message is that sermon that's preached at, and the conviction there that comes with the celebration they were going to have 2 years later. And that also parallels 9/11 in the arrival of the second angel's message. So in the line of Moses, when we went through this, we could see that the birth of Moses here is going to mark the arrival of the first message. And we have these periods of darkness, and this darkness here relates to the Egyptian darkness, the oppression that occurs. And then we have this increase of knowledge, and there's 12 years that he's being raised by his mother, in which he has this understanding. And it's going to finally culminate in this struggle, and this struggle is going to be not so much that he killed the Egyptians, but it's connected to that, in that his role or his responsibility, why he is being raised up, he's struggling with that. With Miller, that's going to be his struggle with deism. So the burning bush experience for Moses would parallel that of Miller at Lake Champlain. So he comes to the burning bush, and this is the empowerment of the first angel's message. A divine symbol comes down, just as Miller saw God's hand. Here, Moses is going to see God revealing himself to him. And then we have today, what we're going to look at is try to understand, in Moses' line, the arrival of the second angel, its formalization and its empowerment, and then the arrival of the third angel for him personally. So remember, again, this is an expansion of a waymark on the line of the Exodus itself, and that the line of the Exodus is much more complex than we had originally understood. And one of the things that we saw is that when it comes to the time of the end for the line of the Exodus, that really can't be with the birth of Moses or Aaron, which is where we've placed it. That is, it's not the beginning of the fourth generation that marks the time of the end, but the time of the end occurs in the time of the fourth generation at the end of two prophetic periods. And those two prophetic periods are the 430 years and the 400 years. And so as far as the line of the Exodus is concerned, we would have to move that time of the end to some other place. But we can see that what happens with Moses personally is connected to the time of the end. Now, Moses's line is going to start before the time of the end, where Miller's line begins at the time of the end, at least for the Millerite line. So that's something that needs to be understood. Now, we also have, in 1798, we have two time periods that end. And one of them is the 25th for Northern Israel, and the other is...
Hello.
Hi, Mark.
You did say of his name, first one, Jesus be born, he died, is the same name of his brother. He hide away from them of secret. They don't know he is still a fellow of Jesus Christ.
Okay, I have no idea what you're talking about, Mark.
No, you did say.
Were you talking about Aaron? Moses' brother?
Jared.
What?
Yes.
Yeah, Moses' brother Aaron, yeah. Yeah.
He did hide away from them, of the bad people.
Okay, that was...
Don't know about him.
Well, it was...
fellow Jesus Christ.
Okay, anyway, it was Miriam.
Secret.
Yeah, anyway, Miriam hid Moses in the rushes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we already addressed that before in one of the other studies dealing with the death decree of the children.
Yes, I not be part of that.
Yeah.
Million.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that we already covered it. Okay, so
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So what was I saying? Anybody remember?
You mentioned 1798.
Okay, right. So we have these two time periods, the 1260 and the 2520, that end in 1798. Now, as far as the time period when Moses is born, I don't know of any particular time period. I mean, we know that we're in the fourth generation when Aaron is born, but that would mark a period of darkness. So there are some differences between these lines and how they relate to the bigger lines above them. But for Moses's line, it definitely relates to the time of the end. That is, it's leading us to the time of the end. We would recognize that the burning bush is going to happen in the year of the time of the end. It's just the first part, the birth of Moses, occurs before the actual time of the end on the bigger line. So when we are going to address here this second angel, it's going to occur after the burning bush. So we're going to look at the scriptures here that relate to this and see if this fits. So remember, he had the signs. So there's these signs that he's going to have, and we paralleled these signs or these tokens to the Lisbon earthquake, the dark day, and the falling of the stars. There's three signs that are given as warnings about the time of the end that's coming, or that judgment that's coming. And in his signs, we looked at them symbolically. Can anybody remember what they were? What were the three signs that Moses was given?
One was when he put his hand in his bosom.
Okay, so that's going to be the second one. He puts his hand in his bosom, it becomes leprous, he takes it out, right? It's seen as leprous, he puts it in again and it's made whole. We also had the rod turning into a serpent. And then the third one is he pours the water on the sand and it turns into blood. And the significance of this is that he's uncertain about him being the one to give this message. Now, we address those in Millerite history. What would they be in our history? What are the signs that God's given this movement?
The collapse of the Soviet Union.
Okay. Well, the collapse of the Soviet Union. So we have these waymarks, but that would be the collapse of the Soviet Union would be parallel to the Pope being taken captive. So I'm talking more about these tokens or these harbingers or whatever you want to call them, that would parallel the falling of the stars, the great dark day, and the Lisbon earthquake. So they would be things that this movement has been given in regard to us being the ones giving a message. Okay, so
Why
are
wouldn't
we,
July 18th be one of them?
okay. Why would July 18th be one of them?
Oh, I said, why wouldn't?
Yeah, I know. And I'm saying, so why wouldn't? I'm saying, why would it? What is your reason that you would take July 18th? Because there's a very specific reason.
Moses had to learn faith through the three tests that he was being given.
Okay. Now remember these, yeah, okay, go on.
No, you please.
So, and we looked at these signs or these tokens relating specifically to the message that he was going to give. Because he needed a message that he could give that would convince the Israelites that he was given a message from God. Correct?
Yep.
Okay. So when we look at the Lisbon earthquake, the dark day, the falling of the stars, what kind of signs are those in Millerite history?
Prophetic, but external.
Okay, the prophetic but external, but they're not what we would call political things. They're symbols or signs or tokens,
Agreed.
right? The signs in the sun and the moon and the stars in Millerite history. And they're designed to allow the Millerites to see the purposes that God has for them. And particularly for Miller in giving this message, he can look at these tokens and see that they're harbingers of the coming judgment. So he believes that Christ is going to return, and he has this message. So they're signs for the church or for the movement to understand their message. The world doesn't really pay much attention to them. I mean, when they happen, the world notices them, but they soon forget them. Miller, in a sense, and the Millerite movement has gathered together these tokens and seen them as signs of what's going to happen. Now, for Moses, he has this message to give, and he personally needs to know that God is leading him. Plus, he has to give a message to the Israelites. And so he's uncertain about this. Now, we said that there is really these three signs, but we also have this fourth sign, or this fourth step, and that is that God is going to speak in this chain of command. God's going to speak to Moses. Moses is going to speak to Aaron. And how did we understand that when we looked at this yesterday? How does that relate to our message? Anybody remember?
Well, you referred us to Revelation 1:1.
Okay, right?
God giving the word to Jesus, who gave it to John to give to the rest of the world.
Right. And also I referred you to the book of Hebrews, and that would be, chapter 1, verse 1, where we have God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. So we can see that God has in the past had used his prophets, but now the Son is going to come. That there's this communication that comes from God, and it's being passed down in some way. So how does this relate to Aaron being the spokesman and Moses being the one who actually receives the communication from God? How would we relate this to our time? Because if we're going to relate this to these signs, so we have these signs, and then finally we have this fourth sign, if you want to call it that, where Moses needs this assurance that God is leading him, and he's hesitant. He doesn't want to speak to Pharaoh for whatever reason. He's making some excuses, but God is going to send his brother Aaron to come to him, and Aaron's going to be the one that speaks to Pharaoh. It doesn't always tell us this, but this is what happens when Moses speaks to Pharaoh. He speaks through Aaron. So how would we relate this to our time? What is this talking about, these signs? Because Moses has a message to give, and this movement has a message to give. And this message developed in a particular way. And some people have rejected these signs. It's another hint. What are the signs that this movement has been given? Let's put it this way. Is it signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, as it was in Millerite history?
relating to time.
Okay, it relates to time, to calendars, right? And this wasn't really planned by this movement. That is, when the movement began, we were given a message based upon line, a return to the old paths. But built into that was time. And it began to be noticed by this movement later. That is, we weren't looking for it. We weren't looking for the symbolic use of dates. But particularly when we came to understand the first day of the 5th month, and its relationship to Millerite history, plus also 1989, the 126 years from 1863, from the end of the prophetic mirror to 1989. These types of things and many others came to us unwittingly on our part, but they showed that there was these signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. And then we had all of these symbols that began to be seen by this movement that come from the study of the Old Testament prophecies. The 187 days from the first day of the 1st month to the 10th day of the 7th month. The understanding of Ezekiel, the understanding of Josiah Litch's prophecy. All of these things were then the tokens. Now, they ended up showing up as dates. And, maybe, we could pick which dates we think are important or which dates are tokens. But I'm not sure which dates we would end up with if we all chose some dates on the calendar, which ones we would think are the most important. But Dwight mentioned July 18th, and definitely July 18th is one of those dates. And it ties together lots of different symbols. In a sense, everything sort of culminates upon that date. All of the things that we had studied in this movement, as Jeff noted, came together. They led us to July 18th. So at least we can see the parallel in the idea that there is these tokens or these symbols that have enabled us to see that God is leading us and that we are the ones who are to give this message. Now, we're going to look at this next section. So Moses went and returned to Jethro his father-in-law and said unto him, Let me go, I pray thee, and return unto my brethren which are in Egypt, and see whether they be yet alive. And Jethro said to Moses, Go in peace. And the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, Go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. So, what is this waymark that we're looking at? What are the symbols that are here?
An ass.
Okay, we have an ass. So that's Islam, right? Okay. Now, what other symbols are here and how would we interpret them? Is the rod a symbol?
It's a symbol of God's power.
Okay, a symbol of God's power. But if we're going to relate it to our line, what else could we see it as? And remember, he can turn this rod into a serpent, and then he can take it again, and it will become a rod. And we related that to Revelation 3, or not Revelation, Genesis 3, verse 15. So this has to do with the promised seed. Would the rod represent line upon line?
I think it can. That came into my mind, and also it's like the measuring of our character,
Okay, yeah, because
as
right,
in Revelation 11.
yeah, we
So
can
it's, I
see.
think they said reed there, but it's still like a stick, a measuring stick.
Right. So we see that in Ezekiel chapter 40, and we see that in Revelation chapter 11, this rod, which can be used as a measuring stick. And so, what about his wife and his sons? Do they have any symbolism here?
His wife can symbol the church.
Okay. Okay, so his wife can symbolize the church. What about the sons?
2 sons, second angel.
Okay. Can you explain that a bit more?
Well, there's 2 of them. So
Okay. So there's 2 of them. Okay. So there's 2 sons, his wife. So we have the second angel's message. We have a doubling. We have the wife, which is the church. And we're going to say this is 9/11. Now, what about returning to the land of Egypt? What does Egypt represent?
the world.
Okay, the world. Okay. And so does 9/11 have anything to do with the church? Does it have anything to do with the second angel's message? Does it have anything to do with the world? Does anything to do with line upon line? And is there a messenger who has the rod of God in his hand, who can see where we are, who can mark this waymark? I know it's rather a rhetorical question, but
I think it's a hugely rhetorical question.
yeah, so we can see that this is this movement at 9/11, and it has this message, and we can see all of these symbols would mark the arrival of the second angel's message. So if we go to that chart that I had drawn, if we're going to mark here the arrival of the second angel's message, this is going to be the return to Egypt. We'll just call it that, shorthand. Okay, does that make sense to people? We're going to place the return to Egypt with all the symbols attached to it as being the arrival of the second angel, which symbolically is 9/11. And you can see how with Miller's line and Moses' line, they both bring together those 2 symbols that we attach to 9/11 in this particular way, the empowerment of the first angel and the arrival of the second angel. Okay. Does that make sense to people, what I just did there?
I think it needs a little bit more explanation.
Okay. Does anybody want to explain it more? Because we have all these symbols that are the second that mark 9/11, which we mark as the arrival of the second angel. But we already have in Moses' line the burning bush. So how else could we explain this to make it clear? Because remember, we're dealing with Moses' personal line. This isn't the big line yet.
you've got the situation with the burning bush, and then after that,
Yeah.
you have the evidences by the three that we were just addressing.
Mhm.
All of that gives Moses the impetus for his return to Egypt to
Right.
provide this message.
Right, and we can see that if we look at, because remember, this is Moses' personal line. It's an expansion of a waymark. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that even the line of FFA is an expansion of a waymark. But it's interesting when we look at these expansions of these waymarks, that the first and second angel's message in an expansion, so a reform line that's an expansion of a waymark, they attach us to one waymark. That is, Moses' line is attaching us to the arrival of the first angel's message. It's symbolically representing that, just as Miller's line is. But it's going to end with the formalization of another of the reform line above. That is, if you look at Miller's line, 1798 to 1833 is actually the arrival of the first angel to the formalization of the first angel in 1833. And we're going to see the same type of thing happening here with Moses' line. That is, when we get to the third angel's messages arriving, where we're connecting these waymarks together in the line above. So we'd have to figure out where the time of the end is specifically in the line above. And we know that the time of the end is in 1533 BC. So Moses' line is going to bring us from him personally being born all the way up to him now giving a message. Either it's the arrival of the first message, or maybe it's attached to the formalization of the first message. So we'd have to figure that out specifically. Because I would say that the formalization of the first message is where it's going to end. So we'll see what I mean by that. Okay, so his return to Egypt is the arrival of the second angel. And then when we go back to the scriptures here and we continue reading, we should be able to see its formalization and its empowerment. Now, the other thing about this is there's this return to Egypt on this ass. And then we're going to see a message that he's going to be given. The Lord said unto Moses, when thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all these wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand, and I will harden his heart that he shall not let the people go. So these signs are going to harden the heart of Pharaoh. Who is Pharaoh in our line? Whose heart has been hardened by these signs? And how could we relate them to Pharaoh?
Would it be the leadership of the church?
Okay, the leadership of the church. Why particularly the leadership of the church? What would be your reasoning there?
Well, they've been the most vocal in rejecting Jeff and his message.
Okay. And we see this with the leadership, but also with many people. I mean, it's not just the leadership of the church that rejects this message, but primarily it's the leadership that is being symbolized here by Pharaoh. Now, how can Pharaoh represent the leadership of the church? Isn't he the leader of the world, of Egypt? How do we answer that?
He's in a sense, he would be over the people of God in Egypt.
Okay.
That's him.
Okay. So yeah, he's the one who's over the people of God, in a sense, holding them in bondage. And we can see the same thing, not that the church is particularly as we would see it in bondage, but it is in a spiritual sense, because it's been the understanding of Protestant theology that has bound Adventists. They've abandoned Miller's rules, and they now follow the church. They follow the leadership, which hadn't happened before. Adventists used to be very independent-minded. But now the theology that they've been force-fed with, let's put it that way, has infected them. So they're in a type of spiritual bondage. But it's the leadership that hardens its heart. And it's not going to receive this message. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee, let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn. Okay, so this is the message that he's going to give. Now remember, this is about the promised seed to some degree. It's going to be about the land as well. But the firstborn is this characteristic of the firstborn is that it has the priesthood, the kingship, and also the double portion. And they're going to be set free because they need to receive the inheritance, which is the land of Canaan. Now, so we have this as the firstborn of Israel. Israel is God's firstborn. Now, why is the firstborn of Pharaoh going to be slain? What's the firstborn of Pharaoh in our context? We know that God is basically saying, if you don't let my firstborn go, your firstborn is going to die, your son is going to die. But what would this symbolize in our time?
Would we be saying the movement?
Okay, but we're talking about pharaohs. This is
I
Advent.
understand.
Yeah, so this is Adventism, right? Pharaoh represents the leadership of Adventism. So what's the firstborn of Adventism? What's its inheritance?
Millerite history.
Okay, well, there's a rejection of Millerite history. I mean, the firstborn is, in this context, would it not be the institutions of Adventism? From their perspective?
Makes perfect sense to me. And all these people that are graduating from seminaries that have taken spiritual formation, they're warping the rest of us, or attempting to.
Well, yeah, and I don't even think it has much to do with spiritual formation. I mean, it just has to do with the whole rejection of Adventism and what Adventists place their identity with. That is, we identify with the institutions of the church, but not with Christ. For many Adventists, it's about the church and all the institutions of the church, the schools, the hospitals, this, the churches themselves, the administration, the pastors. But God's people are the firstborn. Those are the ones who receive the inheritance, the gospel. And the church isn't really interested in that. So its institutions are going to be destroyed so that God's people can be set free. Hasn't that been our message?
I think that's actually revealing the message better than it has been revealed for a while.
Okay. Okay. So this is the message that's being given. Now we're going to have this next part of the story. And it says, it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him, that is, he's going to meet Moses, and sought to kill him. Now, this doesn't really tell us exactly much detail. Do we have any insight from the spirit of prophecy on what this is?
I think he was neglecting to circumcise his son.
Yeah, okay. So what it means exactly, the Lord sought to kill him. Ellen White in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 255, she says, on the way to Egypt from Midian, Moses received a startling and terrible warning of the Lord's displeasure. An angel appeared to him in a threatening manner, as if he would immediately destroy him. No explanation was given. But Moses remembered that he had disregarded one of God's requirements. Yielding to the persuasion of his wife, he had neglected to perform the rite of circumcision upon their youngest son. He had failed to comply with the condition by which his child could be entitled to the blessings of God's covenant with Israel. And such a neglect on the part of the chosen leader could not but lessen the force of the divine precepts upon the people. Zipporah, fearing that her husband would be slain, performed the rite herself, and the angel then permitted Moses to pursue his journey. In his mission to Pharaoh, Moses was to be placed in a position of great peril. His life could be preserved only through the protection of holy angels. But while living in neglect of a known duty, he would not be secure, for he could not be shielded by the angels of God. So God gives him this warning by sending an angel posturing as if to destroy him, to bring to his attention that if he wants to have divine protection, he's going to need to circumcise his son. Now, what does circumcision symbolize?
Baptism.
Baptism, right? So we know that they're connected. Now, initially, when I looked at this chart and I was trying to figure out the arrival of the second angel, I actually marked it as the circumcision. But I could see that really it's expanded out. So we're going to have this return to Egypt as the arrival of the second angel. And then we're going to have this circumcision. And the thing is, we have the divine symbol as well in the circumcision, because we have an angel coming to destroy him. So, so initially I wanted to put all this whole story of the circumcision as the arrival of the second angel. But we can see that it actually just expands out into the arrival, the formalization, and the empowerment. So the formalization, if we take this story, would be and that's where I had to try to decide, do we have the formalization of this as the message that's going to be given to Pharaoh? When God tells Moses what his message is going to be to Pharaoh, would that be the formalization of the second angel? And would the circumcision then be the empowerment?
That's a good way of putting it.
Okay. And because the formalization is usually about a message, right? So we'll just say here, the message. That's the formalization or message to Pharaoh. Given. Or something to that effect. So we can see that here. There we go. And then this here would be the circumcision itself. Can never remember how to spell that.
Because
Okay.
couldn't we place that, the circumcision, as the accepting of the covenant?
Okay, we could. Normally I'm supposed to have this. Okay, can you expand on that a bit?
Well, here's your situation. You're placing the second angel's message, empowerment,
Yeah.
and equating that with the circumcision. So that means that in this situation, Moses has gone through the entire experience of the first angel and the entire experience of the second angel.
Mm-hmm.
So he's gone through justification. He's going through sanctification. He's accepted that it is important that he obeys in all aspects of what's been presented. Therefore, he has accepted the covenant with God, even when he does not, I mean, he understands it, but had not fully complied with it.
Okay. So let's look at Miller's line above. 1831. What is that for Miller?
Isn't that when he's accepted the message that is to go out?
Well, he makes this bargain with God. So, and we can see the formalization of the message in 1818. He's given the message after 2 years of study, right? That within 25 years, the world will end. Christ will return.
Okay.
And in 1831, he's had this burden of this message now, for 13 years. And he has the strong conviction that he needs to warn people of what's coming. But he bargains with God saying, I'm only going to go and give this message if somebody asks me to give it. Thinking that nobody's ever going to ask him to give it. But then his nephew comes and says that he needs to preach at church about the things he's been studying, right? So he feels a little cheated by God in this case. But we can see that there is this responsibility that has been given to Miller because of the study of God's word, just as there's this responsibility to observe circumcision because of the promise that was given through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And remember, Moses has already written the book of Genesis. So he's quite well aware of the significance of circumcision and his responsibility. So can we see the parallel there between Miller in 1831 and Moses in regard to circumcision?
I think it's providing a good parallel.
Okay. Yeah, and we can see, Angela brings up the circumcision of the youngest son and Zipporah performing the rite must be significant. So if we're going to look at the situation, Zipporah represents the church. Isn't it the church that invites Miller? that the church in this symbol is the one that it, in a sense, is connected with the decision that is being made here, that we're marking as the empowerment of the second angel.
Okay, but let me place it this way.
Okay.
Is this a pure church or is this an impure church?
Well, it's not impure, but it's definitely not a church that's enlightened. I mean, this is a Baptist, I don't know what church, well, I probably was a Baptist church because he becomes a Baptist minister. I think he was a Baptist. But the church is involved here. Now we know regarding Zipporah, because it's later talked about in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 383. When Moses fled from Egypt to the land of Midian, he met and married Jethro's daughter Zipporah. So that's who we're talking about. Yielding to the spirit of dissatisfaction, Miriam found cause of complaint in the events that God had especially overruled. So this is later on. The marriage of Moses had been displeasing to her, that he should choose a woman of another nation instead of taking a wife from among the Hebrews was an offense to her family and national pride. Zipporah was treated with ill-disguised contempt. Though called a Cushite woman, the wife of Moses was a Midianite, and thus a descendant of Abraham. In personal appearance, she differed from the Hebrews in being of somewhat darker complexion. Though not an Israelite, Zipporah was a worshiper of the true God. She was of a timid, retiring disposition, gentle and affectionate, and greatly distressed at the sight of suffering. So,
No,
what's that?
you've missed the point that I was making.
Okay.
You read it earlier
Okay. And what was
because it was at Zipporah's insistence that the younger son was not circumcised.
that? Originally, yes.
Okay, so Zipporah had not accepted the covenant.
Right.
B, in not accepting the covenant, she placed her husband in danger.
Right. And we can see the parallel with Protestantism.
Right.
Okay.
So the situation with Miriam, I don't see it being germane to the point that you're making right here, because we're trying to address the first and second angel's message, the arrival, formalization, and empowerment
Mm-hmm.
in this portion.
Yeah.
Miriam is going to have, and she'll have a point within this, but very much differently because she's not part of this portion of Moses's line.
Okay. Yeah. See, I wasn't actually thinking about Miriam at all. I was just reading the statement, what Ellen White says about Zipporah. So I wasn't trying to bring Miriam into it.
I was just trying to focus on the
Okay.
fact where you had been,
Yeah.
that this placed Moses in danger and he recognized his danger.
Right. And it's going to be Zipporah who is representing the church here. In this context, it would be Protestantism.
I would agree with that.
Okay. So that's what I wasn't really trying to focus on Miriam so much, but just that Miriam had this problem with Zipporah. But Ellen White is her description of Zipporah, which I think parallels that of the Protestants in this context, in this parallel. So this circumcision that's happening here is symbolizing for Miller, if we're going to look at Miller first before we bring it into our line. Miller himself personally has this this other struggle. He's had a struggle earlier, but this struggle here is now whether he's going to give this message or not. We can see that directly relates to Moses in his giving of this message. Now, I mean, there's lots of symbolism here regarding circumcision, and that's why I wanted to put it back at the arrival of the second angel, because normally we would put baptism there, and circumcision is baptism. But we can see that this is going to lead to this experience. Now, the other thing that I thought about is when we look at the arrival of the third angel, that was the one that I was uncertain about. Now, here in 1833, Miller's going to receive his credentials. And that's going to be the empowerment of Miller as the one giving this message. So now we're going to see, we have to place this. And I almost wanted to just place this first before we even did the second angel's message. I thought maybe we could figure out what the arrival of this message was. So if we go back to the scriptures here, now there's lots here, and I don't want to necessarily address all of it. But we know that Zipporah is going to be the one that's going to do the circumcision. And so Zipporah takes a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son. So the foreskin being cut off is a symbol of baptism. And the woman is going to do this. Zipporah is going to do it. Even though she's the one that's hindered the message, Protestantism has hindered the message, but it's going to be the one that invites Miller to give his message. And they're going to, in a sense, accept the message for a while. We know that Protestants like Miller. I mean, they make him a minister and they invite him to their churches because not for the right reasons. We even saw this happen with Jeff. Remember, Jeff was invited many, many places to speak. Did the leadership of those churches accept Jeff's message?
No,
No.
not the leadership.
Why did these churches, like in Central America and so forth, why did they invite Jeff to speak?
To draw crowds and get.
Yeah, to draw crowds, and it brought in money, right? But they weren't really interested in the message itself. It took Jeff a long time to realize this. That they were.
Like, as you can see, many of them dropped off during the split, you know.
Well, but when I'm not talking so much about that, I'm talking about even long before that.
I mean,
There was just these people who would invite Jeff to speak in Central America because it would draw a crowd. There's an American coming. He's going to speak on prophecy. They didn't accept what Jeff was saying. That wasn't really the point. The point was they could fill their churches and they could get offerings. And so Jeff was invited. Miller had the same thing. It wasn't that the churches accepted Miller's message, but they liked the revival that happened because of Miller's message. But they didn't like Miller's message itself. So Zipporah's response, a bloody husband thou art because of the circumcision, right? It wasn't really an acceptance of this covenant. It was something done reluctantly. And then we're going to have in verse 27, the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. And he went and met him in the mount of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. And Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshipped. Now, can we then relate this to the arrival of the third angel's message? And if so, why? What are the symbols that are here?
Well, one of the messages that Moses had was about restoring the Sabbath to the children of Israel.
Oh, okay. Can you explain what you mean here?
Maybe
Because
you'll
you're
get
gonna
a
you're
nice-
gonna say that even though it doesn't mention it here about the Sabbath, you're saying that
Yes.
the Sabbath, because you want to attach the arrival of the third angel's message with the Sabbath. Now we know that this is Moses' personal line. So we don't have the Sabbath, for instance, in Miller's personal line. Can you go on and explain a little bit more what you're thinking?
Yeah, I was just really connecting the Sabbath to the third angel's message.
Okay. Now we know that ultimately that's going to be part of it, but this reform line of Moses is actually an expansion of the first waymark on the line of the Exodus. So it's going to bring us to the time of the end. It's going to bring us to the year that's 430 years after they have left, that Moses left Haran. And it's going to bring us to these 430.
Abraham,
Yep.
yeah, you said Moses left Haran.
Oh, yeah. Abraham left Haran, and Moses is going to leave Egypt 430 years later. So what we have happening here is this is marking, this whole reform line is marking the waymark of the time of the end in the story of the Exodus. But it's going to go back and illustrate in Moses' personal reform line a pattern that we're going to see in the larger reform line. So that's what we've always seen, that each waymark is a reform line. And in this case, it's prefiguring the reform line that Moses is then going to be a part of. And the arrival of the first angel's message would have to be marked here when Moses and Aaron meet with the elders of Israel, all the elders of the children of Israel. And they're going to give these signs in the sight of the people. Right? So the people are also going to be there. And the people believed when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel and that he had looked upon their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshiped. So if we're going to line this up with Miller as that symbol of the first angel's message, will we just put here Moses and Aaron meet with the elders? Oh, that's pretty big. Does this make sense to people what I'm doing here?
So that would parallel Miller meeting with the Baptists
Right, him getting his credentials.
leadership.
Yeah. So we can see that this lines up very well. And it hasn't taken a bunch of gerrymandering. It's not a bunch of, forcing things to fit. We can see that they fit quite easily if we just follow through. And this is all the arrival of the first angel's message in the reform line of the Exodus. This brings us to the end of the 430 years, or at least partly to the end. We know that this is in the fourth generation. The 400 years of affliction are about to come to an end, and the 430 years of the sojourning of the children of Israel is going to come to an end. And it's marked here with the arrival of the first angel's message in 1533 BC. But it's that arrival of that message is expanded into this line of Moses, his personal line. And once he meets with Aaron, or Moses and Aaron meet with the elders, so they all come together, and the message is given, that's the arrival of the first angel's message in the big line, even though it's marked as the arrival of the third angel's message in Moses' personal line. And we can see how that parallels with the line of Miller. I mean, to me, it's very clear. Would people agree that this is very clear and easy to do? That it doesn't take a lot of...
Yeah, it lines up pretty good. It's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's not something that's really subjective as far as I can see. You just have to take the time to understand this history and to look at it.
And think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know.
But it's not something subjective. It's not something where people are going to spend a lot of time arguing about because they're going to have a bunch of different opinions, unless they're those type of people. But we can see if we accept this message and we understand Millerite history, we can easily see Miller's line, and we can see how it lines up with 9/11, with these actual 9/11 dates. And then we can take Moses' line and we can see how the burning bush is going to line up with August 11th, 1840 as a symbol. And the return to Egypt is going to line up with 9/11 as a symbol. Now there's also, remember, one of the things that we look at when we look at a line is that the center is a cross. And we know for Miller personally, this is really his conversion. So for Moses, what is this return to Egypt? What is it that symbolizes the cross?
Well, Jesus' triumphal entry on a donkey, and then Moses went to Egypt on the donkey.
Yeah, okay, so we got the donkey parallel. But just as because this is just the arrival of the second angel, but we know that it symbolizes the cross. It's sort of the center of this structure. Right? I mean, it's April 19th, it's a division between two classes. Now we know that when Moses returns to Egypt, his wife and son does not come with him. Right? Even though they're going to start on the journey with him, or they're not going to come with him, he's going to send them back. Correct?
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Later on, Zipporah is going to come, but initially she's going to be sent back. So there is sort of a separation that occurs here. And we said that Zipporah represented what?
The Protestants?
The Protestants. Is there a separation in Millerite history between the Protestants and the Millerites on April 9th?
Definitely.
Right? So we can see that
definitely.
symbolism is there, that separation. But she's also later on going to be called back, right? Which would symbolize, not in this line, because this line it doesn't happen, but later on she is going to come back and return to Moses after the Exodus. So so there's lots of things here that are really quite interesting. Now, initially when I was trying to sort through this, I did have decisions to make. So I don't want to mislead people in the idea that, you just read through it and you just line everything up and it all happens. You have to take time thinking about it. You have to refer to all these other lines. But we're going to have these next events are really going to be lines upon the bigger line of the Exodus. That is, if we take Miller, the work of the enemy let's go back here. I just want to clear this up so that people see it quite well. Remember, we always have the work of the enemies that occurs in a line, but this is a personal line. Okay, the burning bush could represent the twin towers that couldn't be quenched. That's interesting observation. Anyway, so when we look at Miller's line, remember, this isn't the bigger line of the Millerites, but it's going to typify some of these things. And one of the things you get in a reform line is the work of the enemy. But really, we don't have the work of the enemy in Miller's line as something external. It's more something internal. That he's going to experience this internal struggle that is really the thing that he has to conquer. That's the enemy that has to be conquered, the enemy within. And we see this with Moses as well. But now what we're going to do is we're going to look at, and we're going to have to do this more next week, but try to understand this reform line, because we're going to have this making bricks without straw. So we're going to see that this is going to be the work of the enemies that's talked about in Exodus chapter 5. So now what we have to do is we have to place where we can take Moses' line, and we can take some of these things that exist in Moses' line, and they're still going to be part of the line of the Exodus. And I always say it's the arrival of the first angel to its formalization. And we can see then when Moses meets with the elders of Israel, that's going to be the formalization of the first angel's message. Even though it serves as the formalization of, or the arrival of the third angel, it's going to be the formalization of the first angel's message on the line of the Exodus, which means that the time of the end is going to happen prior to chapter 4 and these last few verses here. So chapter 4, right here. So this is going to be 29 to 31. So 29 to 31 is going to be the formalization of the first angel's message on the line of the Exodus. So that means this story here that's going to be addressed prior to that is going to be the arrival of the first angel's message in the line of the Exodus. And so we could take this whole story of Exodus chapter 4 and see it as the arrival of the first angel's message and the increase of knowledge. So this idea that I'm taking something that's in the line of Moses and expanding it on this bigger line, I don't think should be odd to us. And that the signs here that we applied to the line of Moses, we can see that those are the tokens that fit in Millerite history. And it didn't really make that clear, even though for Moses they're signs and they can fit into his line. They're really signs that fit into Millerite history. So you can take them on different levels. Because for Miller personally, we're going to see that in the year that he is he becomes ordained as a minister, that's going to be the year of the falling of the stars, 1833, right? So you're going to have 1833 as the falling of the stars. I don't know why we have this on the charts. I don't know if we have it on the charts. But that's the year that Miller receives his credentials. So for Miller personally, they mark something, the arrival of the third angel in his line. But we can also see that these signs now, that the time of the end is going to be when God is going to call Moses specifically. So we wouldn't mark the time of the end in the line of the Exodus as the birth of Moses. So we're going to have to expand this line, or take these lines and what line is this? Well, that's Snow's line. So we're going to just have to create a new line. I'm just going to move this up. And we're going to have to create the line of the Exodus itself. So just take this. Does that make sense what I'm talking about? That this Exodus line, I probably should have it above the other one. So we have the Exodus line, and we're going to see that Moses line is just this period.
We can't see it.
Oh, sorry about that. Keep switching back and forth. So, so now you should be able to see. So we have this Exodus line, and all of Moses' line is just the arrival of the first angel to its formalization. That is, that's what it's illustrating. Even though technically it starts before the arrival of the first angel. That is, it starts with the birth of Moses. Where in the Exodus line, all of this is these two waymarks symbolically. Just as Miller's line is, if this was the Millerite line, would just be these two waymarks. So in both cases, Miller's lines and Moses' line is illustrating from the arrival of the first angel to its formalization. So in the Exodus line itself, though, the arrival of the first angel is not the birth of Moses. It's at the time of this oppression when Moses is called at the burning bush. So if I was going to take this then, and I would have to say, this is the burning bush. Does that make sense to people?
It seems to line up.
Right. Because the Exodus line has to end at the time of the end, and the time of the end, or has to begin at the time of the end. So the time of the end is the end of 430 years and the end of 400 years. It's also in the fourth generation. But the fourth generation is a period of darkness. And we can see that the oppression has been going on for more than 80 years when Moses sees the burning bush. But we can see then all this story from the burning bush to Moses meeting with the elders of meets with the elders of Israel, that is then going to be the formalization of the message. So in Moses' personal line, that's going to be the arrival of the third angel's message. But in the Exodus line itself, that's going to be the formalization of the message. And then we're going to see that it's not going to be that difficult to see that when they go, that there's going to be the work of the enemies that's going to be involved here. And that you're going to have the empowerment of that first angel's message connected with giving that message, it's going to be empowered when he gives it to Pharaoh. And then we will see how the plagues fit in, the arrival of the second angel, what that means, its formalization, its empowerment, and then the arrival of the third angel. We should be able to see that this is the arrival of the second angel is going to be able to be illustrated here, and its formalization, empowerment, and then the arrival of the third angel. So we have to decide what the Exodus line is itself. Where does the Jordan River go? Where does the Red Sea go? Is the Jordan River part of the Exodus line? Is it the fourth angel? All these types of things. So that's where we have to go next week. Any thoughts about what we're studying, about what we see here in front of us with these lines?
Just the message given to Pharaoh at the second AF there. So that occurs after the circumcision. Do you have it there before?
No. When it says message to Pharaoh given, this is the message that Moses is given that he's going to give to Pharaoh. He doesn't give it to Pharaoh. So the message is given that is going to be given. Does that make sense?
All right, okay, yes.
Right. So yeah, so he doesn't give the message to Pharaoh, but the message is given, which is the formalization of a message. He now has a message. 1818, Miller has a message. Moses
Mhm.
now has that message, and that message is going to be that Israel is God's firstborn, and he needs to be freed. And if he's not, that the firstborn of Pharaoh is going to die.
Right, okay, so maybe just make the wording a wee bit clearer.
Okay. So how wee bit clearer do you want it to be? Can you tell me what to write? Moses given message.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. And we're going to see how one of the things we should be able to see is when we look at Miller's line, for instance. I mean, we could clearly see how that relates to our line, especially with those two 911s. But it is also an expansion or a prefiguring or a type of the line of the Millerites itself. And so the different characteristics of these waymarks in Miller's personal line are illustrating the waymarks that are going to occur in Millerite history. Now, one thing we haven't done, and we're going to do eventually, is we're going to look at Jeff's line. Because if Miller has a personal line and Moses has a personal line, wouldn't Jeff have a personal line? So it's something we shouldn't neglect in doing. In a sense, we already saw that when we examined Jeff's understanding. And we know that there is, in Jeff's personal life, there is an arrival of the third angel's message. So it's something we're going to have to sort of flesh out later. Any other observations or ideas or questions?
Well, we know the separation with the calf, golden calf, they had separation there.
Okay, so you're saying when we get to the Exodus line, the story of the golden calf.
Separation.
Okay, now where would
Pagan.
we put that in? Because so that's one of the things that we're going to have to address. So
That'll be
when
probably
we-
later on in the line, though, that
Yeah.
later on in the line.
Okay, so one of the problems that we've run into is in our history, is we're not always clear what line we're in. And we're going to see that as we sort through the Exodus line, and we look at these different reform lines that exist, that is, not only does the first angel's message have its, which is a waymark in the line of the Exodus, have its expansion, but you also see with this with the second angel's message and with the third angel's message, each of these arrivals, at least, have a reform line attached to them themselves. And that sometimes we get a little bit confused because we'll see characteristics and we attach them to the bigger line when really they're just an expansion of a waymark. That is, you're going to see the characteristics in a waymark that exist on the bigger line above it. Now, this is why, and I've mentioned this before many times, but when Parminder introduced the ideas that, or the idea particularly that we couldn't have a waymark typify another waymark, and Jeff just blindly accepted this, which I've never been certain why he just accepted what Parminder said, because that was actually an undoing of our whole message. If we take the position that waymarks cannot be typical of other waymarks, we actually are destroying line upon line itself. And Parminder was trying to force line upon line into this artificial parable teaching, that lines were really just parables, and that they had to fit these particular parables that he had, the building. So the architectural line, the agricultural line. And there was, what were the other lines? I always forget them.
Marriage.
Marriage line. Wasn't there a fourth one as well?
There was.
I just can't think what it was. But anyway, he had these artificial structures that he used as the basis for the lines, but the basis for the lines wasn't these parabolic applications. He basically was making the same error as Chawatu was with Psalm 23. There was some truth in it, but there was also mixed with some errors. And that is, we know that the template that we have been given is Millerite history. Without Millerite history, we would not have the key that would unlock these lines and these parallel lines. And that particularly is the message given to this movement. The understanding of line upon line. Here a little, there a little. So without the understanding of line upon line, which would not have come to us without an understanding of Millerite history, this message can't stand. And if you take away the typical nature of each waymark, that they typify each other, that they have the same characteristics, and they have the same characteristics because they're all reform lines. If you take that away, you undo the message. And that's what Parminder was doing, whether it was wittingly or unwittingly. That's something maybe he only knows and God only knows. But he was doing it nonetheless.
Yeah, the other example I think was geography.
Geography. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember how that one worked. I don't quite remember it.
Yeah, I think you have like the King of the North putting his palaces in the glorious holy mountain and that type of thing.
Okay, right. And that one I should say, I was going to say it went over my head, but I think it was sort of beneath me, maybe is a better way to put it. it didn't make much sense what he was talking about when it came to this geography stuff. I really was puzzled by some of the things that Parminder was saying, but I just thought it was my lack of understanding. Now,
I'm surprised Jeff accepted it.
well, you know, there is a way in which he was being manipulated, and that everyone was being manipulated. So,
Yeah,
yeah, Parminder had a way of manipulating people. So, you know, when we look at, you know, we've talked about this many times, but this message is based upon this line upon line. And what we've understood is that this is a rejection of Protestant understanding of interpretation of prophecy and a return to Miller's rules. But Miller's rules expanded in a way that Miller did not see. That is, this precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little and there a little, is the message. This is how we are to understand the truth. So, you know, and if this is how we are to understand the truth, we need to understand our lines. And we've had counterfeits, and we've had people trying to force us to accept their interpretation of the lines. But those interpretations were false interpretations. But that's prejudiced some people against this message regarding line upon line. That is, there are some people in this movement who reject line upon line. Their emphasis, what's that?
well, they didn't seem to invite other people's thoughts on the way it's presented, what was presented.
Yeah. So anyway, it's what we're doing right now. So just to really clarify this, that we need to understand the line of the Exodus, and that we have to take our time with it. And we can't bring in the preconceived ideas, because obviously the line of the Exodus we had was a mixture of lines. It wasn't really the line itself. And then we need to see within each of these lines, of these major reform lines, like the line of the Exodus, we need to be able to see the role that this movement has, who it is that marks this movement, which is that light related to the second angel's message, preparing for the Sunday law. That's what this movement is about. That's what we've seen. And so we should see that in the line of the Exodus itself. Okay, so if there's no more comments, we can close with prayer. Okay, let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the time that we had to study here this morning. And we ask, Lord, that you can continue to work upon our hearts, correcting our understanding. I pray, Lord, that you can help this movement, that we can come to that decision where we can enter into a covenant with you, and that we can trust in the signs that you have given, and that we can give this message to Pharaoh. Be with us now throughout this day. May your angels watch over us, and may we pray for one another, and may you bring a conviction of the things that need to change in our lives and the power to change them. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.